All right, welcome to NFL Outdated Cover 2 series on the Indianapolis Colts. I am joined by Stephen Burton, the co-host of No Horsing Around podcast. How's it going?
I'm good, man. How are you?
I am doing well, and you should be doing better this week. I'm guessing. It's been kind of a rough, just an interesting season. Now that was a big win. Tell me a little bit about your thoughts on the Colts season so far.
So it's been interesting. Obviously the Colts came into the season. You had you had higher expectations um, of what you thought they might do. Adding Carson Wentz, whether you liked it or not. I mean, I'm a big Carson Wentz guy. For people who listen to our podcast, I'm kind of the self-proclaimed Carson Wentz homer a little bit. I really liked the pickup, but there was a lot of outside noise of Super Bowl contenders.
Mm-hmm.
I know on our show, we kind of tried to stamp that down a little bit. We didn't feel like they were one or two pieces away, but it was what it was. You felt really confident. And then going into the year, training camp, preseason, there was a lot of issues, obviously. We had whole weeks where, you were talking about broken foots, which was, Carson and Quentin Nelson both had the same exact injury that put them out. So it was a really bumpy start. And then on top of that, you looked at the schedule, and the schedule is one of the toughest ones in NFL history, is what was being said. And
Mm-hmm.
so a lot of Colts Nation was looking at that, trying to figure out what's a good spot to come out of this. And I mean, you're playing, the Seahawks with Russell Wilson looked great. The Rams, I think, are one of the best teams in the NFL. The Titans are always tough. The Ravens are the Ravens. I mean, so it was a tough stretch. I feel like, three of the last four they've won now. They seem to be gelling, and people are quick to forget there was a lot of time lost between training camp, preseason, where the team was still trying to gel. They seem to be gelling. Carson and Michael Pittman Jr., T.Y. still not really been on the field. The O-line has not been fully healthy all season until they're kind of starting to get there. So far, it's been tough. I mean, I told you off air, I live in Tennessee, so dealing with the Titans being 5-2
Mm-hmm.
is a whole different kind of thing.
Well, yeah, and especially after Tennessee's early loss to the Jets, right? You know,
Yes.
it, it was it's tough to figure out who they are. And then you look at the Colts, off of last year, the defense to just in the playoff run, and you just kind of thought the pieces were there. Adding Wentz, obviously, you know, Philip Rivers was decent last year, right? But I mean, so you would say that Wentz is at least a step up from Rivers?
So we had this conversation before, me and my co-host Zach, to where I think he's a step up in certain areas. Um, I think obviously he's more mobile, he's more athletic, and he does have a bigger arm. I don't think he dissects the play and has the ability yet to do those things that Philip Rivers could do, of moving people and how he knew to operate in the NFL. Obviously, Rivers, m- many more years as a professional, much more of a veteran. That the mental aspect, I think he's probably not necessarily an upgrade, but everything else, I mean, we've seen it already this year. His ability to use his legs when healthy has been a huge factor. I mean, just a couple of nights ago, just the game on Sunday, it was a huge factor. He ran for the touchdown. He picked up first downs. That was not the case with Philip last year. He couldn't do those things. He was running in wet cement, essentially. So I think it's an upgrade in some areas. In some areas, it's probably flush, and in some areas, it may not be.
And kind of going back the progression of quarterbacks from Peyton Manning, I mean, it's been an interesting kind of road so far, right?
Yeah, we can go even further. We go, Jim Harbaugh. That
Oh
was
yeah,
that was my guy, Captain Comeback.
yeah.
And then you get to Peyton, and I mean, I think the knock on Colts fans is we've been very blessed with quarterback play, and we don't really know what it looks like to wander in quarterback purgatory, as Kevin Bowen uh, states sometimes. And we went from Peyton to Luck, and then obviously the sudden retirement of Luck, which a lot of people, it's very easy to forget that was only 3 years ago.
Hmm.
And you're still in the playoff hunt. You seem to be in position. The team was built for him. It's still a very sore subject. It makes a lot of Colts fans very sad to still talk about, mainly because he's still in Indianapolis. He lives 10 minutes from the facility. He goes to the facility. Obviously, reports came out a couple weeks ago that, I mean, he talks to T.Y. Hilton every week. He went to T.Y.'s house while he was injured and brought him dinner. I was actually
Wow.
listening to the radio today in Nashville, and they had Chester Rogers on, who's an ex-Colt, and he plays for the Titans, and he said he actually talked to T.Y. and Andrew 2 weeks ago.
Wow. So, I mean, is there a thought that he would come out of retirement or anything like that? Or
Everybody, I mean, I've talked to, George Brimmer is a friend of our show. He's a fantastic reporter in Indianapolis, and Zach Kiefer as well. He works for the Athletic. We've talked to them, and there doesn't seem to be a sense. This is the last year the Colts own his rights.
okay,
That it's over after this year. They did. I mean, they paid him $25 million the year he retired. They didn't have to. They still did it, and he seems very happy. The rumor was they made a call to him when Philip retired, and he said, "Thank you, but no thank you." There was a big rumor saying that he was coming back. I had a chance to talk to Zach Kiefer at the time, and he said he didn't even think Andrew knew what was happening. He has a flip phone. Like, he's not on the internet. I think he was even out of the country at the time. So
yeah.
as much as we'd love to see it, I don't foresee him coming back. I think he's very happy with his retired life with his new daughter and things like that.
Yeah, and you can't fault an athlete for stepping away and and just being able to enjoy life. And one thing that I do miss and enjoy my Twitter life a little bit better when I believe it was the Twitter handle Captain Andrew Luck was
Oh yes.
I love that one. That was amazing.
Yeah, they had another one for Jacoby Brissett the following year. It wasn't as good, and they had one for Rivers,
Yep.
still not as good. It fit Andrew very, very well.
Perfectly. Yeah, I mean they've even tried I think to do it with Justin Fields. I'm like, not
Yeah,
there.
yeah, it's not quite the same.
So speaking of quarterbacks, then is Wentz the long term fit? Then I mean, is he's got a little bit of time now, to kind of settle in. And is he gonna kind of be that answer that they need?
Personally speaking, I believe so. When they traded for him, a lot of it was, he does have a 4-year contract. It's essentially they can be out of it in 2 with not a lot of dead cap. So it was kind of a 2-year tryout, is what a lot of people said. I personally think coming out of some of the last couple of games, the last stretch of 3 or 4 games, he looks to be finding his groove. He looks to be the part. He's very, very close. It's overplayed sometimes, but he's extremely close with Frank Reich. Um, they are just very copacetic with each other and very close off the field too. So I mean, I think if you asked me, I think that he's probably he's the quarterback. You're not looking for someone new at this point, and he's probably the quarterback for the next. I mean, he's only, and we forget too. I think he's 29. He's around the age of Andrew Luck when he retired, like what he would be.
Wow.
He's probably your quarterback for
Yeah.
the next 5 to 7 years. So I mean,
Which
I'm okay with it. I think he is. I don't know where some other Colts fans sit, but I think you're pretty locked in with your quarterback now.
and he has that talent. I mean, he showed it in Philadelphia. He showed that he could do it. It's just it seems to be having that you know synergy, so to speak, with the coach. I think that definitely helps him. It was, I can't imagine, living or even playing football in Philadelphia. So um, Indianapolis is a little bit more laid back then.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and I've had a chance, and I've got a really good relationship. Kelly Green from the Kelly Green Show, she does a podcast for Sports Illustrated, and I've had a chance to talk with her a couple of times, and she kind of warned me too. She's like, just prepare. Like, it's kind of very interesting to see. He seems to be a player that a lot of people just enjoy poking holes in.
Right.
But she had kind of told me that a lot of what was in Philly was overblown when he was coming out.
Oh,
And more in regards to like the bad teammate and things like that. There was a lot of talk about that. Obviously, he's the captain this year for the Colts. Everyone saw the video of him playing knockout during the offseason with the team. He flew out to LA and threw balls with Michael Pittman and Desmond Patman. He literally, I think at one point we tracked it in the offseason. He threw with basically every receiver the Colts had down to DeMichael Harris, who's a practice squad guy.
wow. Yeah. And that's obviously needed to kind of get that chemistry. And he's always seemed, coming out of NDSU. I actually spent some time in Fargo. I lived in Fargo, and I know that area well. And he's it seems like a, all around good guy, and basically just kind of getting his talent together. I mean, it, as a Bears fan, I saw Mitch Trubisky, and he seemed like a good guy. He just didn't have it to be a starting NFL quarterback. Maybe he'll get there sometime, but Wentz definitely at least has it.
Yeah, and I think a big thing that gets lost too, and Wentz and maybe even Trubisky sometimes too, is that sometimes you just need a reboot. Sometimes you just need a different set of eyes, a different kind of coach, a different kind of QB coach or offensive coordinator, just a different environment. And like you said earlier, I think he's a Midwest dude. He's from North Dakota.
Mhm.
Coming back kind of to the Midwest, we can all be honest. The media market in Indianapolis is a lot different from Philly. And he mentioned in one of his first interviews when he came to the team, his wife is from Kentucky. So he's kind of where he's kind of in a sweet spot, I think, in relation to where he wants to be. And, uh, they had, we Colts Nation have been lucky enough with like Giovanni, the sportscaster. Everyone pretty much knows who he is. And he called, he said he had talked to Carson, and Carson was going to have the best year of his career because he's healthy now and he's very, very happy to be in Indianapolis.
And that's definitely what you want to hear. And there are definitely some reasons to be happy to be in Indianapolis with the wide receivers. I mean, you talked about him throwing with everybody. Michael Pittman Jr. has emerged. Paris Campbell before he got hurt his was decent, and Ty. I mean, is this one of the best wide receiver groups, and it really kind of connecting with him?
So it's interesting. It depends. It would probably depend on who you talk to in Colts Nation and when you talk to them. Wide
Mhm.
receiver is kind of like a bugaboo a little bit. We tend to get banged up very much there. Obviously, Ty went on IR right before the season started. He's played one game, very impactful game. The joke was he was coming back for the Texans because he owns. He's got like 1,800 career yards against the Texans. It's insane.
Wow. Yeah.
But so he's there. Pittman has emerged. We said it in the podcast, our reaction podcast after the Niners game. He's officially the number one receiver. In our mind, he's kind of emerged as that. Paris Campbell is like this mythical unicorn a little bit for us. He does these flashes, but he's just not been able to stay healthy. I had him actually as my comeback player of the year preseason. That's who I thought it would be outside
Right.
of Carson.
Right.
And he seemed to show flashes. He just struggles to stay healthy. There's a lot of people that feel like if he had, and me including, I felt like it was anomaly a little bit because he had never been hurt at Ohio State. But if he got hurt again this year, then he gets the label, in my opinion, as injury prone. And you have to question at this point if the Colts where they sit. And then, a couple other names that aren't, big time names would be, there's a Desmond Patman who's been practice squad. He's on IR right now. He's from Washington State. He set all last year. They're big on him. And then obviously the name that everyone was kind of on the tip of everyone's tongue during the preseason was Michael Strawn from Charleston, which was a D3 program. He's from the
Mhm.
Bahamas,
Oh
but the
wow.
dude is like 6'5", runs like a 4.5. Like he was amazing in the preseason. They've kept him. He's on the practice. He is active every game, but he doesn't play yet. That's a big one that they're really high on, but they felt kind of coming from the lower level, he wasn't quite ready. But so they're there. Um, the biggest gel seems to definitely be between Carson and Pittman. Like I said earlier, they were throwing Pitt as soon as the trade was announced. Carson flew out to California to throw with Pittman,
Wow.
so they kind of started developing that right away. So I mean, cautiously optimistic would be the way I would put towards our wide receivers, as long as they can stay healthy.
And is Ty is he has to be how much longer is he going to be there?
So he's on a 1-year deal right
Yeah.
now. He was a he wanted to test free agency. They love him. At the
Mhm.
end of last year, he was signing jerseys. He told Chris Ballard that he loved him, and Chris Ballard said that to him at the Buffalo game, which gave a lot of Colts fans the idea that he was leaving. Obviously, there was a huge movement during free agency called #BringTY Home. I was actually lucky enough at the time to be part of the group that helped start that,
Nice.
and it got airtime in Indianapolis. He acknowledged that it meant a lot to him. We
Cool.
do know he took less money to not go to the Ravens and come back to the Colts, but it is a 1-year deal. I'm not sure. My co-host with Zach, he feels like he probably comes back again. I I think it depends on how the younger receivers play this year. I would love for him to retire a Colt. I don't know if it's feasible.
And you said Mike was it Strahan?
Strawn, yeah.
John, would he fit that kind of Ty Hilton mode if if he was ready and then they could let Ty go, or where does he kind of fit
So
style
he
wise?
is skill set wise, who you would like to see replace Ty would be a Campbell because of the speed element, and that's kind of what Ty's bread and butter is.
Hmm.
Strawn is a big receiver, kind of very similar to Pittman. And we've, as the Colts, we've always had a mixture of the two. We've never had a bunch of big receivers and no small ones. Obviously our best receiver in the last 10 years has been T.Y. Hilton, and he's a small guy. But ideally, I think, Ballard is very big on develop your own. In an ideal world, I think he would like to develop the wide receivers who are on the roster that would be able to step up into that place if Ty were to leave after this year.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that would make sense. And speaking of kind of another group that has been homegrown, the running backs. You've got Jonathan Taylor, and taking over there, and Hines as well. They paid him. So what's the split there between those two?
So the bell cow is obviously Jonathan Taylor.
Yeah.
Everybody loves him. I love him. I was unsure of the pick at the time just because it's a very high pick. It's the second round, traded up in the second round. We had Marlon Mack already there coming off of 1,000-yard season, so it was kind
Mhm.
of an interesting pick. He kind of started slow at the beginning of last year, and
He
since
did.
he clicked it on in a big way. And so he's your bell cow, but you do have Naheem Hines, who is kind of like our version, I would say, of like an Alvin Kamara. I'm not putting him in the same class as that, but catch the ball, punt return, the way he can run between the tackles. He's very, very versatile. He wants to run between the tackles more, is what's been reported. So I think they do a very good balance. Obviously, they throw in Mac. Mac's in there too. There's a running back on IR named Jordan Wilkins that they like a lot too.
Yeah,
So
he
when
filled
he
in
comes
a
back,
few.
they'll
Yeah.
mix that in too. I
Yeah.
think for them, we're so reliant. As the Colts go, they love to run the ball because of that O line, and so they want to rotate the running backs because I truly believe their goal is to get to the end of the season and have Jonathan Taylor as fresh as he possibly can be and not as run down because we saw it last year. When he came on, it was headed to the playoffs and he just took off. I mean, he's the second leading rusher in the NFL right now, which I find hilarious as a Colts fan because I was actually discussing this today. Is he's second leading rusher, but he's still 239 yards behind Derrick Henry.
Yeah. It's
It's
just
just the guy's ridiculous.
yeah. So yeah, I mean, when you talk about the line, Quentin Nelson, and he's back, right?
Yeah. He came back during the night. He was put on the short term IR for the 3 weeks, and he came back for the Niners game.
And you got Eric Fisher there. Yeah, so I mean, you have a solid line there.
They're starting to come together a little bit more. Fisher was a little sketchy at the beginning of the year because he's working his way back from his Achilles injury last year.
Yeah, yeah.
Obviously, Quentin Nelson is the stud of the group. He's a future Hall of Famer at this point. 3-time All Pro. He's going to get paid next year. We're just waiting for that. He's got his 5th-year option, so he's going to get paid. Ryan Kelly's fantastic. He's the anchor in the middle. Chris Reed is someone who's come in who's done really well lately. And we've been a little hampered with our right tackle with Braden Smith being out, but he seems to be on his way back. That's this mystery injury that no one's really sure of. He's just not played in 4 weeks.
Interesting. Yeah, and so kind of you touched on Marlon Mack as well. He came out and like they're mutually looking for a trade. Is that still happening, or what's the latest on that? I mean, is that going to happen this week or?
I think if it happens, I think there's a very good possibility that it happens. I think it hasn't happened because there's the name that continued to be floated out there was that the Niners were interested in him, and there was no way the Colts were going to trade him to the Niners before they played. One, competitive advantage, and two, it's kind of disrespectful to Marlon Mack,
Oh
and they
yeah.
love Marlon. He tore his Achilles last year, and he stayed in Indianapolis the entire year and was in every running back meeting with Jonathan Taylor to help kind of groom him last year. So they love him. They signed him. I think part of the reason they signed him, veteran leadership, but also there wasn't a lot out there for him. And so they brought him back because they didn't want that for him. So I think it's a very real possibility. Do I if you had to if I pin me down on what they would get for him, I think the consensus that we've seen is maybe a fifth or sixth round pick. There's just not a high demand because he is coming off the Achilles. He's not put a ton on tape this year. But
Right.
yet again, we point out 2 years ago, he's 1,000 yard back. So, I mean, I do think there's a very good possibility a trade happens in the next week.
Yeah, and was he homegrown? I'm trying to remember.
He was. So he was
Yep.
actually, he was a fifth round pick out of USF, out of South Florida. Um, and they brought him in. I want to say he was backing up potentially Frank Gore, maybe. That may be back too far. But he kind
Yeah.
of split and then he took off. He's an amazing runner. Especially if he can get back to being healthy. He's got a running style very similar to like a Le'Veon Bell. He's very cut, pick his holes. I think he taught a lot to Jonathan Taylor last year.
Well, yeah, and so like with Mac, I think being homegrown and it's so interesting. When you have an NFL running back, I mean, it's sometimes tough to have someone that's going to come in, but he really when he came in, he just I mean he was solid and he can do a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, and he's a great locker room asset. So I think that part of the reason the trade is waiting too is I think they very much want to do right by him. Ballard is really big. He has said in the past if he doesn't match an offer, like what he'll do a lot of times in free agency is he'll tell you this is how much I'm going to pay. If you can go get more, that's fine. I'm happy for you. And he'll let him go. The rumor with TY this offseason was he kind of had a line in the sand. TY was going to leave, and Jim Irsay called and said, "This is what he's not leaving. Pay him this."
Wow. Yeah. Well, that would be interesting with Mac if you got a fifth round pick and he was a fifth round pick.
Yeah, it'd be a nice little swap, because obviously any picks we can get are good because the hope here in Indianapolis is at least that we don't have the first round pick because that's contingent on how Carson plays and if we make the playoffs.
So yeah, talk about that a little bit. At what point do they lose that pick?
So they lose the pick if Carson plays 75% of the snaps and we don't make the playoffs, or if we just make the playoffs.
Okay. So is he and he's definitely on pace for that now?
He is, well, partially. I mean, he didn't sit. He played with two sprained ankles. I was actually at the game in Tennessee, and he was 50%. He was 50% at that game at best. And he slowly worked himself back. He's on pace to definitely reach that. So that was a worry with the Colts too. We're 3-4, and we're on pace to potentially have a top 10 pick at one point, and he's playing. So we're going to have a top 10 pick that goes to Philly. Everyone, before the season, if you told me we're going to make the playoffs, Carson, and we lose the first round pick, everyone was fine with it. So that's about where we sit. He's on pace to go over 75%, and God willing, we're on pace to make the playoffs.
Right. That's what you want. You want to continue to build off that, especially after last year. And yeah, talking about another pass catching group, as an Iowa fan, going back to Dallas Clark, one of my
Mhm.
favorite, players of all time. Where are the Colts tight ends in this? I mean, we talked about the wide receivers. Where are they now? I mean, Jack Doyle's been there. I mean, is that something they're going to have to kind of upgrade eventually, or
So Doyle's been there. Doyle's got a couple more years left on his contract. I actually thought there's a potential that he might get cut this offseason as a cap casualty, but at the same time, he's very beloved. Um, undrafted from Western Kentucky, from Indiana. So I
Yeah.
mean, people love Jack Doyle. Mo Alley Cox is a big one. He kind of came on last year a little bit. He's definitely, people know who he is this year with the 4 touchdown catches on the season already. He's a massive human being. I say he has clown hands. If you see him grab the ball, it's like a Nerf ball, like one of those mini Nerf balls in his hand. He seems to fit what Carson likes to, which is a really big bodied player that he could just throw the ball out to. So people are really high on him. He's taken some time. He actually didn't play any college football. He played basketball at VCU,
Oh,
and they
okay.
drafted him out of VCU and put him in. They had to teach him how to play football.
Right.
Um, as far as going out and getting one, there's always the potential in free agency to kind of dabble in that. But they did spend, let's see, what was it? I think a 4th round pick on Kylan Granson, who is a tight end out of SMU that they really like. The year before with last year, they had Trey Burton. They're always looking for kind of that move tight end.
Oh, I know
It's
Trey
a dirty
Burton. I was a
word
Bears
for the
fan.
Colts,
Yeah.
but Eric
Yeah.
Ebron-esque. When Eric
Yes.
Ebron had his one great year with Andrew Luck, you talk 10 plus touchdowns. They want that.
Yeah.
Obviously, Ebron kind of fell off the following year and fell out with kind of the Colts and Colts Nation. But they're looking for that. Kylan's kind of coming along. He's getting his snaps. He's had a couple of drop issues, but they do really like him. I think that's probably what they would be maybe like a Mo Alley Cox and Kylan Granson for the
Yeah.
future.
Well, yeah, I mean, Jack Doyle was kind of a thing, and I don't know if that was more of kind of Andrew Luck or quarterback. It's interesting, kind of just the connection between the quarterback and whether they the tight end they like. I mean, I've talked to the Packers guy about Bobby Tanyan,
Mm-hmm.
his connection with Rodgers, and was he even that good, or was it mainly Rodgers who kind of made him, but you say that Wentz is kind of really found a comfort almost with Mo Cox then.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a lot of talk that the Colts were potentially going to make that trade for Zach Ertz uh, to give Carson a comfort, kind of, for lack of a better word, like a safety blanket.
Mm-hmm.
But he seems to have found this comfort level. A big knock on Carson has always been accuracy, so he likes big-bodied receivers that he can throw the ball to. And Mo Alley Cox is a massive man. I mean, I wouldn't want to tackle him in the open field, and doesn't look like a lot of people want to.
Right. Speaking of kind of a comfort group, last year it seemed to be a comfort group, the defense. And, what's been the difference this year? And, you've got some of the key players. Talk about some of the key players this year, and maybe what's different from last year.
So, big difference between last year and this year. I'll touch on that, and then I'll talk about some of the key players.
Yeah.
Is the secondary has been a little bit more suspect this season as opposed to last year. It's been a little bit more banged up. Xavier Rhodes was the cornerback number 1 last year. He's been very banged up this year.
Yeah.
Obviously, in
He
the
had kind of
Niners
like
game.
that Willis Reed kind of thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, he literally he went off the field in pregame with a calf injury, and then came back. He didn't play the first few games of the season, so there's been that. Rock Yassin is a guy that I like, that I go back and forth with Zach, and he's been hurt. TJ Carey is another guy. He's on IR. Kenny Moore obviously is the one everybody knows, but at the same time, he's our slot corner. He's very key in that position, but he doesn't go one-on-one and travel with the wide receiver once, but no one really does in our offense, in our defense. And then obviously the big news last week for us was Julian Blackman going down for the rest of the year with his torn Achilles in practice. That hurt. So, I mean, the secondary, kind of the back end, has been a little different. And then at the same time, kind of the tail of last season and this season is the pass rush. It's not there for the Colts. They've spent a lot of capital. Kwity Paye, they've gone out. Dio Adengbo is someone they drafted. He's actually practicing now. So we're hoping, Colts Nation is hoping to see him in the next couple of weeks. But they don't get outside of kind of in the middle. DeForest Buckner is DeForest Buckner. He's the star of the defense. Traded a first round pick for him. I think it was the 13th overall pick, and he's been everything that you've wanted with him. He's amazing. He puts the pressure, the D line kind of between him and Grover Stewart who Grover Stewart, we talked earlier about homegrown. That's a homegrown guy. And so they like him. He's done well. Al-Qadim Muhammad has done really well. I mean, so they have talent there. We want to, as Colts fans, we want to see their edge. We want to see Kwity Paye. We want to see Ben Banigou, who had a really big preseason. We want to see him finally produce. He was a higher pick, a second-round pick. So we want to kind of, and then there's also Kamoko Toure, who was a second-round pick who's not quite been there yet either. We want to see those guys kind of start to produce. And then obviously, in the middle is Darius Leonard.
Mm-hmm.
He is who he is. He's becoming more known this year, I think, than even years past because his ability to take the ball away from people and how he does that. I mean, the punches of the ball, everyone saw on Sunday night where you saw him actually look at the ball and look in the punch. And then they interviewed him afterwards, and he actually studies tape on how players carry the ball, where their weak points are in their carry, so he knows where to hit it. I mean, and he's a future Hall of Famer too, so we're lucky. Okereke is, I see you smiling. It's Okereke for the longest time, and
yes.
it's Okereke now. So
that's what I was wondering. It's one of my favorite names, and mainly because of the way he was announced on draft day. So.
Oh yeah, I mean, well, and he's coming. He just kind of went with it, and he's coming out and say he's trying to honor his Nigerian heritage a little bit.
Yeah.
And so he wants to be called Okereke.
Yeah.
I think the joke on Sunday night was he announced himself as Okereke. I think it was something someone said when they introduced themselves, but he's been really well. He was a preseason kind of gem for a lot of people.
Well, that was,
and he's really had to step up.
That was Pat McAfee, I believe, made the pick.
Yeah, he did, and that was, that was a very memorable. That was in Nashville.
Yeah.
So that was where I live, and that was Pat McAfee and Reggie Wayne did a couple of picks that year that I think stuck in the Titans fans' crawl a little bit.
Yeah. So speaking of somewhat that may stick in the craw of other maybe people who aren't Colts fans, but Irsay, Jim Irsay, right?
Yes.
And recently, didn't he make like a Super Bowl prediction in the next few years? There'd be several. Talk about that a little bit.
So he's done it a couple of times. His biggest regret, he says, is that Colts didn't win multiple Super Bowls with Peyton Manning. So obviously when Andrew Luck came in, he said multiple Super Bowls. When the Colts started out as slow as they did, he's one of the few owners that will take to Twitter pretty easily, and interact with the fans. And he kind of put it out there that to calm people down, he fully expects the Colts to win 2 Super Bowls in the next 10 years. It was his prediction. And I want to say this with Irsay. I think he gets a bad rap a little bit across the league. He gets kind of called this kooky owner. I mean, he has this amazing guitar collection, and he's taken pictures with like Elton John's piano. But at the same token, I like to kind of tell people this is a guy who pretty much every day does giveaways on Twitter to fans, plane tickets to send them to away games, to send them to the Super Bowl, just money in general, coupons. He does that. Obviously, the Colts this year have Kicking the Stigma, which was their big thing with the mental health. They raised $2 million, and he promptly stroked a check for $2 million more to match that. So, I mean, and he's grown up in football. His dad owned the Baltimore Colts, moved them to Indianapolis. He started as like a scout and worked his way up. I mean, not worked his way up. He's the owner's son, but
right.
He's been in every facet of it. He loves football. He loves the Colts. He loves Indianapolis. And he's a fan. He really is a fan. I think there's a lot of times that Chris Ballard and Frank Reich are like, just don't say something that you're going to regret. Because in the offseason, he discussed what they were looking for in a quarterback, short-term plus long-term fix. He kind of tipped their hand a little bit more than anyone else wanted to. But yeah, he definitely went out and said two Super Bowls in the next 10 years. So he put a little bit more pressure, but obviously he feels really confident. Reich and Ballard both got extensions in the offseason, so he really feels confident with them too.
Yeah, and that's kind of what you want for an owner. You don't want an owner to just come out and say, oh, my team stinks, or at least he's excited about it, and that's what you
Hmm.
want. And yeah, you hear different things about him flying, I don't know, kids different places, or just using his private jet. There's so much that I hear about that. Like I even saw he was sitting with Condoleezza Rice at the game,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
just connecting with her, and obviously she knows a ton about football, and you kind of like to see that, at least an owner who takes an interest in it, and wants to see you know his team do well.
yeah. And I mean, I think one of the things too is we talked earlier about Giovanni the podcaster, who we've been lucky enough as Colts fans to get to know. He's the diehard Eagles fan. He does his own podcast. I think Giovanni's 14. I think he's
Oh
14
wow,
now,
yeah,
and his favorite player is Carson Wentz.
yep, okay,
And
yep,
when Carson traded, obviously there's the famous video of him crying about that. But at the same time, Colts Nation really embraced him. Jim Irsay really embraced him. He actually came to the game last 2 weeks ago. He was at the game. They sent him the very first. That's how news broke of what Carson's number was going to be. Giovanni got the first jersey.
oh cool,
He went on Pat McAfee. He was on the sideline. Darius Leonard, DeForest Buckner, Kenny Moore. Everyone went up and talked to him, and he has become an honorary Colts fan. Uh, he said that's his AFC team. He's still very much the Eagles, but Jim Irsay is a big part of that. Jim Irsay embraces pretty much everybody.
and that's what you want to see. Yeah, I mean, he may say a little bit too much, but at least you can see kind of the passion there. Um,
Yes.
and watching your podcast, I can definitely see you have a passion for the Colts, and so but I do really enjoy that you have some realistic takes. A lot of times you have like fans like, oh, and I don't know what, if it's like more like the Giants and Eagles type of thing, they're like, oh, my team's awesome, your team sucks. And like realistically, as we sit now, where do you see this, like the projection for this team? Like, what do you see?
So I've been pretty bullish on 9 to 10 wins. Uh, Preseason, I think I had 11 to 12, but there were certain games that I felt more confident in. Um, the opening stretch was a big thing. The opening couple of games, that murderer's row,
Mhm.
you let one slip away in Baltimore. That was a big one. You kind of let one, slip away in Tennessee. You were kind of there. That's one solace that Colts fans took in the first bit. You were kind of there with the Rams. Carson went out and couldn't continue and come in on that final drive. Um, I've been pretty bullish on 9 to 10 wins. Now, is that good enough to win the division now? I'm not real sure. And honestly, I don't know if it's good enough to get into the playoffs with the way that the divisions and the way that the AFC has looked. I mean, we're a little luckier because the AFC seems to be obviously not as good as the NFC, and so not as deep. But for me, I mean, I think I sit like I think probably like 10-7 is what I feel. Obviously, you got to pick up. Zach did a podcast, did an episode for us about a month ago, where he did kind of the road to 10 wins at the time, and at the time we had one, so it was kind
Right.
of like, what's the road to 10 wins? And you have to pick up an upset. You do have to get.
Hmm.
We still have the Bucks, we still have the Raiders. Um, but on
Yeah.
the same token, you have two against the Jaguars, one against Houston, another one against Tennessee. You do have the Jets coming up. you
Hmm.
have
Yeah.
you have a couple of wins that you feel like you can mark down. So I mean, if I'm sitting here, I still say 10-7. It's gotten me some blowback, obviously, from some of my Titans friends that they're kind of shocked about that. But that's kind of where I sit. I feel like they're starting to come together at the right time.
Well, yeah. I mean, in schedule wise, I mean, this will be an interesting game with Tennessee to kind of see where they're at and everything. But yeah, you got the Jets, Jacksonville, Buffalo. It's gonna be tough. Tampa Bay, but yeah, Houston, New England. You just don't know what they are yet, right?
Hmm.
um, Arizona, Las Vegas. Yeah, and it's just been so interesting to see what Las Vegas is as well. And you kind of look. I was looking at the playoff spots, and it- AFC is going to be interesting. Everyone's kind of assuming that the Chiefs get get things turned around. And I don't know if
Mhm.
that's going to happen. The Colts could have an opportunity to just kind of get in there and maybe bump out the Chiefs.
Yeah, and I was actually looking at it today, and there's obviously there's seven there's seven total playoff spots now with the super wild card,
Yeah.
and so there's the third wild card position, and in the AFC, the Colts are technically right now tied with a bunch of other teams sitting at 3 and 4. And, when you look at the schedule too, like you said, it's very interesting when you get to the back end. Is Kyler Murray still playing the way in December that he is now? Are
Oh,
the
yeah.
Raiders still playing the way they are in December as kind of the high they're riding right now? And then also, are they playing their players? Are the Cardinals, are they locked in, and are they sitting Kyler Murray at that point? Same with the Raiders. Are they sitting Derek Carr? So there's so much up in the air when you look at the later games that you as a fan, as a fan first and a content creator second, you have to have hope. You have to kind of sit there and go, okay, you got to believe a little bit. You don't want to be that person saying my team's going to go, 2-15.
Well, that's, as a Bears fan, that's kind of where I was at, initially. I think I put something on Twitter initially. I said, talk me off the ledge. Like, how many more wins, a 3-4 win team? And I don't know how many more they win. I was surprised, obviously, they beat the Bengals, but I don't have hope now this year for the Bears, right? And for me,
Right.
as a fan, yes, I'd love to see them beat the Packers. I'd love them, not to have Rodgers, say what he did, right? But he's right, but right now is not what I'm looking at. I'm looking toward the future. I think when you have Fields, and it'll be interesting to just see coach wise. I mean, obviously, you have Frank Reich. He's going to probably be there for a while.
Yeah, I mean he's very loved. So, and like I said earlier, he actually just got a contract extension.
So that's huge right there. I mean, the Bears. I mean, another tangent about that, like Nagy. I mean, if you have a coach like stability there, and you have all the pieces. The Colts have the pieces now, but kind of looking toward the draft, what are some pieces that they need to add? Going into 2022 draft.
So across the board, it tends to be secondary is a big one. Kind of the back end, like we talked about earlier. O line depth is another one, and then everyone's always going to say wide receiver help just because of the beating that the receivers in our team take and how they tend to get hurt, and also depending on, like I said earlier, with Paris Campbell and how they feel under him. Um, it's going to be truthfully, it's going to probably be the priority is going to be finding potentially a left tackle, depending on how you feel Eric Fisher looks by the end of the season. I think we all said that we think, especially on our show, that we think it was kind of a nudge, nudge, wink, wink. You show how you're doing, and we're going to sign you to an extension. It'll be multiple years. I don't know. He's not looked great, but you got to take into account, like I said, that he's coming off the Achilles injury. So I mean, O line is a big one. O line, pass rush is there, but they've invested so much in the draft on it that I don't think that they're going to go that way this season. If they look to fix it, I think Ballard is going to have to break from what he does a little bit more and go out and sign someone in free agency. Who that is, I don't know. I don't really know what the class looks like. The class was really deep last year, and they didn't do anything. Like everyone's sitting there going, is Ballard even there? Because they didn't sign anybody. And we kind of all felt after that he was saying, we're going to see what we have, and then we'll go from there. So a lot of people will say pass rush. I don't think they invest. They've invested so much. It's going to be if it were me, and I don't get paid like Ballard does, but I would assume it's going to be O line.
Yeah, and obviously that's not the sexy pick, right? But that's
Mm-hmm.
what's going to definitely pave the way for Jonathan Taylor to keep doing what he needs to do, and all of that in that offense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, and they've done it before. It wasn't the sexy pick, and people said you can't take the guard in the top end of the first round, and that's Quentin Nelson, who's a future Hall of Famer. So, and completely changed the way the O line played for the Colts once he got on the team.
Well, that also helps with Wentz as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, and that's you got to protect him.
Absolutely.
Through that stretch when we were 1-3 or 0-3, he was the most. He was trending towards being one of the most sacked quarterbacks, one of the most hit quarterbacks in the league. And the O line for the Colts, that's what the bread and butter has always been. So they're going to look to protect him because he is. I mean, as much as we all love Carson, he is in. He can get hurt, and if you hit someone any times enough, they're going to get hurt. So
It's,
they're going to want to protect that because he is
absolutely.
getting paid a lot of money.
Well, speaking of a player or a position that will probably not get draft attention, but his kind of maybe locally getting a little bit of attention, the kicker. What's up with Rodrigo Blankenship?
So to be exactly, I'm not entirely sure. He had a hip injury. Leading in, he actually aggravated it earlier in the week, and then really aggravated it in pregame against the Ravens. He's on IR. Um, and it's an interesting predicament. Hot Rod is very loved. He's people love him in Indianapolis, but there's always been a question of his leg strength, um, and how well he can kick the longer field goals. And obviously for the Colts fans, we had Mike Vanderjack way back in the day, Adam Vinatieri. But when Adam Vinatieri went off the rails, it was everyone remembers that season. I mean, he missed so many kicks, so many extra points. And what used to be you just watch it, now you're watching through your fingers, which is how I watched the Ravens game, um, when he was taking the kicks.
Right, right.
So I mean, he is very loved. They brought in somebody in preseason too to work with him, not work with him, but competition for him. Um, I do think it will end up being him when he comes back, but I think they're comfortable with who they have right now to allow him to get healthy. Uh, so I mean, he's been on it. Let's see, he went on it after the Ravens game. He's 2 weeks. It's 3 weeks is what he's supposed to be on it, and then they can activate him off of it. We'll kind of see where it sits then. I don't foresee them cutting him or moving away from him, but they're big on competition, and if he's missing his kicks, it's going to be interesting to see what happens.
Well, as a Bears fan, I know that. I mean, you got kickers. I mean, it's such an interesting position, and I have to tell you, I'm not necessarily a fan of Blankenship anyway. He when he was in Georgia, he won the Kicker of the Year, the Lou Groza Award, and over the Iowa kicker. So um,
Uh,
there you
hey
go.
man, you
So
got to respect the specs.
well, yeah, he's kind of. It's weird because he's one of the most recognizable kickers, and I what did I see? I, he must have like social media as well, and that he did something with one of the another player to say, "Oh yeah, we play the same
Oh, it's
sport."
DK Metcalf. Yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah.
what it was.
He
Yeah, yeah,
put the
yeah,
side by side with him and DK Metcalf, saying they both play the same game.
yeah,
He
yeah.
actually, what's funny fact with him with Hot Rod too is when he found out he made the Colts his rookie season because he was an undrafted free agent. Uh, the story is he was putting together Legos in his apartment when they called to tell him he made the team. So he's his own kind of cat, man. He's
Yeah, yeah.
he's a different dude. He is not a varsity man, but we're lucky with him. Very lucky with Rigoberto Sanchez, the punter too. Decent special teams. Rigoberto is probably looked at very different from how he's probably one of the best punters in the league. But we'll see what happens. I think, like I said, I think they're comfortable with who they have,
Hmm.
but they're I could see them bringing Hot Rod back in. They're very loyal.
Yeah, it sounds like that just theme kind of runs throughout the team, and kind of comes from Ursay then.
Yeah, I mean they're sometimes to a fault. They were
Yeah,
very loyal to Vinatieri. They never benched him. He went on IR, but they never benched him, and he was costing numerous games. They were very loyal to Jacoby in the season that he played. And I'm a big Jacoby guy. He's just not a starting quarterback. He's an
agreed.
amazing human being,
Yep.
an amazing backup, but just not a starter. And they gave him every opportunity. They're very, very loyal to the players. And like I said, sometimes it's to the detriment of the team a little bit.
Yeah,
They can't see beyond it, but sometimes that works and the player's able to work their way out of that slump.
absolutely. Well, I could talk all night football. Any day I can talk football is a good day, and I definitely appreciate you coming on. Uh, now everyone can find you at No Horse Around Podcast. Then,
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter. I'm on there. It's at Stephen Burton 86. You can find the podcast at No Horsing. You can also just honestly, you can go on YouTube. You can type in No Horsing Around Podcast. You can type in Colts Podcast. You might catch one of our videos pop up there, and you can go over there and check that out. You can also check out my co-host. It's at Colt Nation 365. That's Zach. He does an amazing job too. Very lucky to have him as a co-host. But yeah, I mean, check us out. We always try to have other people on, other teams. We're going to have some Titans people on this week. We've had Ravens and Niners. We're not bashful about giving the other fans a chance to come in and talk.
love that. And also scrolling on the bottom of the screen, I do have your turnbuckle time as well. So got to give some love to the wrestling fans too.
Yeah, I do have me and my buddy Adam actually have that one. That's just it's periodically. It's just more of a fun one where we'll talk about kind of wrestling, AEW, WWE, things like that, and
Yeah.
just have a good time every once in a while. Sometimes the grind of doing the NFL one. Sometimes you just need to kick back, relax, and talk about not the most credible thing.
Yeah, oh yeah, something. Well, and some of it's not as stressful. So that's why I like.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, well, thanks again. This has been NFL Outdated Cover 2 series, and we'll catch you on the next episode. Thanks again.